that experiment with Google AI was quite good. There's an idea there. Instead of I don't know about instead of, because I don't know how they think it works anyway, because it depends what they're doing at the prompting engine or whatever they have. But what I was doing was modifying that blog post and each time letting Google add the search terms. And some of the search terms that it added are things that I wouldn't have thought to Google. So, for example, one of the links was define some word. Was that meta language? I think I'll go one way. Look, a bus. You don't see that very often, especially on a Sunday. Central Connect, I mean, what's that mean? So I would modify the post. Google AI would add search terms, and then I would let it add them, and then I would look up some of them, and when they were interesting or good, I would copy a quote, put it back in the document with an explanation of why I thought it was good. And then this thing would run through again and it would suggest more search terms. And that iterated about 4 or 5 times. But you could use that in a deliberate way. So you could build a prompting system that did that. And depending on how I don't know how AI works, because they're all different, right? They all have their own. It's just soup. It's witchcraft with computers. It's absolute bullshit. People haven't a clue what's really going on. They're just trying shit that works. And oh wow, look, it works. It's fancy. It's great. Let's make $1 million. Meanwhile, they're building a fucking nightmare of shut up maintenance software maintenance problem, because this stuff is being thrown together in a huge hurry, because every advance consists in cutting and pasting big chunks of Python code and calling out to AI integration libraries, and God almighty, it must be I'd hate to have a job working there. Oh my God. Cliff Click just got employed by these guys. I can't remember what their name is. It's a couple of ex-Google people who were doing this in Google and realized that it was a nightmare and that you could make money out of it or something. Maybe they're just Christians, I don't know. So they went out and started this company called, what are they? They have a product called Mojo. And basically the purpose of the company is, as far as I can see, serving dogs breakfast. Look. Aren't they lovely? These 2 horses in the front here are Exmoor ponies, and the other 2 are Shires. two different breeds of Shire. The big guy is the youngest of them all, I think. I met the owner a few times. Bye-bye. The sheep have got the lion's share of the grass. They're both number 12. Bye-bye. Yeah, so this company basically builds some kind of language. They had to make it look like Python because that seems to be the only language that these AI hackers can handle. And it's basically a piece of AI middleware between the GPUs and the front end, or maybe between the GPUs and the code that actually does the neural networks. But it just all looked so... Man, the whole thing just leaves a bad taste in the mouth. Still, if you live in California, you've got to pay your rent. I asked Clifford if he knew Nick Shaler, and he said he did have a vague recollection of his name from when he worked at Sun, but he left Sun before it got bought by Oracle. And I mentioned that Nick had worked on this little Java JVM for smart cards, and so that came up in the Compiler Coffee Club. But anyway, back to AI. So that's one way that I could tolerably work with AI, I suppose. You write, you cherry pick what it produces, incorporate it back in what you've produced, and let it get inspired by that, and then just keep iterating, I guess, until you die, because fuck all happens. I've been doing this for years. Absolutely fuck all happens. You just get insulted by petty-minded people. But the one result that it produced that was worth two. This is like the Spanish Inquisition. Two results that it produced that were worth something were not a fanatical devotion to the Pope. The two things that it produced were a link to an object-oriented design pattern called document abstraction. And what that is basically putting a type system on top of a parser of a general purpose type parser, one that parses, say, XML. So you can have arbitrary structures in your language, and you parse them and you impose a type discipline on the results of the parse. So you can presumably reject automatically reject. Say the context of this is a kind of document database, document-oriented database, rather than a relational database. So document-oriented database just stores a whole lot of documents like XML and has a much more flexible structure, whereas relational databases impose a very strict system of tables with columns and attributes on the columns, and these are types, and then but a document doesn't require the schema to be laid out in advance. A document-oriented database basically has a flexible schema. And the problem is that if its schema is flexible, how do you know the database hasn't got rubbish in it? Like, somebody whose account balance is strawberries. So the type structure is the type discipline is used as a filter for the query results, and that would be helpful, because this whole thing about using relational databases behind web servers is a very clunky and frankly broken idea, because apart from all the problems of SQL injection attacks and all that, the bigger problem almost is that when you modify the schema, which has to happen because the data, the world you're modeling changes, you've got to incorporate new tables, new columns, new relations between those tables and new columns, and then the problem is you have a generation, a kind of tree of changes to the schema, and incorporating these and merging is really hard. And I've never seen a database that even pretended to try and get it right. The best you can get that I've ever seen in practice was a completely linear structure, which said you've got to upgrade your database to the latest version, and the only way you can do that is by stepping through each prior version one step at a time. That's how this RT, request tracker, used to work. You had to do every upgrade because it couldn't merge diffs. It couldn't produce a combined diff between version 1.2 and 1.4 because it couldn't. You had to go 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. So you have a better chance with a document-oriented database and document abstraction. But I don't know what other problems you introduce. I mean, conceivably you could pick up old data from a very early version which appeared just to have the same type structure as new data but completely different semantics. So I'm not sure it solves a problem in a deep way, but this is all a very far cry from just chucking shit into an AI and watching the tokens it generates. And that's what people are into these days. But you have to recognize that behind it there's somebody who has to write working code to produce the infrastructure that supports all this shit fuckery. And it's just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And you're completely at the mercy of your horde of complete hooligans who are just hurling Python scripts around GitHubs and Happy Face and God knows what. Hugging Face, that's where that sounds like it's the GitHub of AI. I am so fucking sick of the tech industry and that bullshit. And there's some poor dead animal that's been run over. That's not going to be nice to meet. No, it's just the different concrete reflecting differently. The concrete edging on the path looked like my mother-in-law, my ex-mother-in-law's dog Snowy had been run over and outside the cemetery. Well, that W5 documentary, that was the real deal. They were completely honest. They didn't fake that one, and there was no over dramatization, and it was brilliant. But it is incredible. 500,000 people went through there in 2023. And I saw in total 300 when I was down there actually going through the gap. But when I got after into the UNHCR chain, there's this chain of camps. Barrio Chiquito is the first one, and then it goes on and on and on and on and on, and eventually they let you out. If they haven't managed to kill you yet. I did meet the Senafron. I met a Senafron patrol very close to what's the name of that town? Puerto Baldea somewhere. The dead bodies that I found were all in the river. They weren't on the side, so they were kind of clean. It was very bizarre. There was nothing really horrifying about it. There was just a guy with his head in the water. You could see it was a guy because he still had his polera on. And but all the skin on his face had been eaten by the fish. And there was another body about within 100 yards. But the thing is, the skin was absolutely white because they'd been in the water for weeks, I presume. So I don't know the skin pigment had completely faded. Because I doubt these people were both albino. So they could have been even black people. I don't know what happens to bodies that are left in water for a long time in the tropics. But I had the idea that they were Haitiano, just because of the back of the guy's head was the one with his face in the water. I could just see the fold of skin on the back of his head, and every time I saw the Haitian guy in Switzerland who worked in the migrant shelter in wherever it was I was in Switzerland, I kept seeing this guy dead in the river that I'd seen before. But he reminded me so much of this dead person. Yeah, that W5 documentary is definitely worth watching. They actually did more. I've seen that they did one on the train, the death train up through Mexico. I don't know what else they've done. There's so many different ways of getting up through Mexico. The backs of trucks, cargo trucks, which aren't meant for people, so when the truck has an accident, dozens of people are killed. And that's what happened while I was there. A few weeks after I went up, a whole truckload of Guatemalans were killed in a crash. All just because of economics. It's very hard to work out the statistics, because if most of the people who are going are basically economic refugees, and if the conditions of entry are that you are a refugee from a human rights perspective, you're going to have to produce those reasons for your movement. So you're going to look for every bit of evidence that you can that your life is in danger where you live, and then take that evidence with you and present it in these courts when you're in the system. So you get all these guys whose husbands are in the other cell and they want to be together, and I don't believe half of it. Weeds, lovely crop of weeds. That was that lake. the last place I met David Lynch. Sometimes there's some deer in that field down there. But I expect with the harvesting they'll have to have found somewhere to run to. Folliculoides crop. Somebody really ought to work out what you can do with that stuff. The swans quite like it. I imagine that it has a slightly peppery taste like watercress, but I haven't tried it.